Okay, we're back. We're live for the 2 o'clock rock here on Friday, which is in many ways our favorite day. And we have a Skype show today. We're happy to introduce Mitch Rosenberg. He's the CEO of Kinderlab Robotics in Boston, Massachusetts. Welcome to the show, Mitch.
Thank you so much, Jay.
Great to have you on. So the Kinderlab Robotics would suggest robotics, but you told me just now that it's not necessarily the case. So exactly what is Kinderlab Robotics, and how does it relate to your experience in the business?
Well, Kinderlab Robotics relates more to the first word in the name than the second. So we're about kinder, we're about children, and in particular, our mission is to encourage STEM and STEAM literacy among very young kids. We have kids using our product to learn about STEM and STEAM that can't even read. That said, I've worked at 3 or 4 industrial robotics companies over my career, and that's part of the reason why I got involved in educational robotics.
You know, let me take off on that for a minute and say, gee whiz, they can't read, but they can do STEM and STEAM.
Absolutely right.
How does that work? I mean, how does that work in the brain? I mean, how come? And we've heard this before. You're not the first one who said this, but how does that work so that you can educate a kid to do science before you can, educate him to read?
Well, reading is a very technical skill, and kids learn it at different ages. Science, in some sense, is a more general skill, as is mathematical thinking or all kinds of thinking techniques that add up to science, technology, engineering, and math. What's really important is to get kids feeling confident that they can do science or math or technology at an age where they still are open to the idea that their personality may in fact be exactly the right personality to do a little science. Yeah. Otherwise, wait too long and they start learning that science is too hard or someone else is much better at it because they started sooner.
Yeah.
And our vision for the world is that STEM literacy is as important as, well, language literacy.
Well, let me take off on that. So you have a kid, he's a young kid, he hasn't learned to read yet, but he's learned science. And in learning science, and I found this is a critical point, he becomes confident of his ability to learn something, since it's fun, he becomes confident in his ability to sort of interact, with the knowledge base of science. Now that means that this kid is going to have this magic element of confidence earlier in his life than he would if you waited on reading before you lent him that confidence. So this means exactly a better kid, right?
Well, that's exactly right. And in fact, with the right tools in front of a child, they can teach themselves science, technology, and some math, where they cannot teach themselves reading. And that sense of autonomy, that sense of self-empowerment, to overuse a word that's overused, is more valuable than the particular content that child is learning about at the moment. And that's our mission. And we make products that enable kids to learn exactly that way.
Well, just in a larger context, just for a moment, seems to me that if we had a world populated by people who could teach themselves, it's like artificial intelligence. You learn to learn. You learn to learn. Don't give me a fish. Tell me how to fish so I can get all the fish I want. And what that means to me in a larger sense, if you ruled the world and if you delivered your technology and your approach to everyone everywhere, we'd have a better world because people would learn themselves. They would do critical thinking earlier. And that would help decision process on the macro level. Wow, that would save the world, in my opinion. Wow. So you're on a good track, Mitch.
Well, that is in fact our mission. Our mission is to save the world by encouraging worldwide, universal critical thinking. And our hope was to get it done before this election, but let's not go there.
You heard it here on Think Tech. Now, if we can only speed this process up, we can save the country and save the world. Yeah, I really think it's important. I think when you get into the 21st century and these large groups of population, they're a very complex world. You have a complex array of information coming at you from all sides. Some of it is disinformation or misinformation. You have really got to do critical thinking, or the results will be disastrous. Not only here but everywhere.
Well, that's exactly right. And the biggest enemy of critical thinking, frankly, is what we were talking about earlier, which is lack of confidence, which is a certain kind of fear. And you can see that in technological devices everywhere. We're protected from learning about the technology in the devices that are in our lives by design. Now, that's fine when you're using that device like an appliance. You don't want to have to always think about how it works. But I remember as a kid learning a little bit about how lawnmower engines work, partly because I had access to the inside of a lawnmower engine. But with my cell phone, I don't have access to those components. And even if I did, I couldn't figure out how it worked. This is a serious problem, and it prevents kids from learning the confidence they need and from getting the sense that technology is something that they should be able to control, not something that can control them.
Well, I think there's two things working there. I mean, one is kids do have an ability to understand these graphical things and scientific concepts even without language. I mean, they're symbols, right? I mean, language is symbols and science is symbols too. All graphics help you understand the symbols, put the symbols together. So kids are really good at that. We always say how, kids are so smart they can pick this stuff up. But, the other thing, to me is that that you have to build, God, in the old days they called it a GUI, a user interface, a UI, so to reach these kids, because, you can't assume that they're going to be able to understand some complex DOS-looking program. You have to give them a graphical image if you want to relate to them and get them to, buy into your symbols. And I suspect that's what Kinderlab is about. Am I right?
You're exactly right, although I do want to give you a quick shout out and thanks for referencing my past history and in the word DOS. Nobody ever uses that word anymore. And nobody uses GUI anymore, by the way, either.
I know.
But you're exactly right. Our user interface, if you will, is where the magic of our product is. Because what we understand about kids is two critical things. The first is that they've got to have positive experiences about science, technology, engineering, and math before they're 8. Otherwise, some of them will, like me, become professional nerds, but others will start going down a path where they say, oh, technology isn't me. I can't think like a scientist. And then that self-reinforces. So the first thing is they have to have that experience while they're under the age of 8 or 9, before they've formed a rigid sense of what their identity is. Okay. And the second thing, and it's just as important, is that kids at that age don't really grasp abstract concepts very well. They are really finely tuned to grasp tangible and kinetic concepts very well. And so our user interface is one that requires no screens, no keyboards, because those are abstract devices. They're not age appropriate for kids that we're talking about, really young kids under the age of 8. We, in fact, encourage parents to keep their kids away from screens during that age time. Instead, we enable kids to write very extended programs, the equivalent of 20, 30-line programs, without being able to read, without using screens and keyboards, by using something that kids in every country in the world intuitively know how to use. You know what that is?
No.
Wooden blocks.
Say it again?
Wooden blocks.
Wooden blocks. 20 or 30 lines of code with wooden blocks?
Yeah, sounds retro, doesn't it?
We've got to hear more about this, but I feel this is such a cliffhanger that I'd like to take a break so that will sink in. And when people come back, they're going to be really interested in finding out how wooden blocks writes 20 or 30 lines of code. That's Mitch Rosenberg with Kinderlab Robotics. I can't wait for the answer. We'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Chris Leatham here with Think Tech Hawaii, and I invite you to watch my show, The Economy and You, each Wednesday at 3 o'clock here in Hawaii on OC 16. We look forward to seeing you. Aloha.
Aloha, I'm Kirsten Baumgart-Turner, and I'm fortunate to be able to host Sustainable Hawaii at thinktechhawaii.com. I hope you'll join in with us every Tuesday from 12 noon to 1 p.m. to see the interesting people we have to share with you their information. Aloha.
Hi, I'm Ethan Allen, host of Likeable Science on Think Tech Hawaii. Come join us every Friday at 2 p.m. when I interview interesting scientists about what they do, why they do it, and why we should all care about it. It's a lot of fun to see. And you can learn interesting stuff. You'll hear all kinds of fascinating science, and we know you'll have a great time. Hope to see you then. Bye-bye.
Okay, we're back. We're live. We're Likeable Science. That's Ethan Allen's program. He's in Guam right now, so I'm sitting in for him and talking to a guest that he arranged, Mitch Rosenberg of Kinderlab Robotics, who joins us by Skype from Boston, Massachusetts. So the cliffhanger question is how these kids, less than 7 or 8 years old, maybe sometimes a lot less, who knows, can write code using, and I quote, wooden blocks. We're all waiting, Mitch.
It's really true. Here's the secret formula. We put graphical images of our robot doing different actions. Each block gets a different image. So if you want your robot to move forward, you have a picture which shows a little graphic showing moving forward. You want the light to be turned on, we have a little graphic on the next block where the light is turning on. And each block has a wooden dowel and on one end and a hole in the other end. And the children simply sift through all these blocks with all these wonderful, exciting actions they can make their robot perform. And they sequence what they want their robot to do, peg them together, and they have a program. But your question is, logically, how does that program get from a string of images on wooden blocks into the processor, into the brain of the robot? Built into our robot is a barcode scanner, and each wooden block has not only a picture of the robot doing something on it, but also a unique barcode. And so I'm here to tell you that kids from the age of 3 are born knowing how to do barcode scanning. So you just scan blocks one at a time, and then you have your program entered into the computer brain of the robot.
It is programming. It's just programming with blocks, that's all. It's the same thing, so intellectually as what you would do to program.
That's exactly right, because what is programming? Programming is sequencing a series of actions and making sure that that sequence is understood by the device that's your target device. So absolutely it's programming, but the secret is that a line of software code is a very abstract idea. What we've done is we've made it tangible, literally physical, because kids' brains are wired to work on physical objects at that age. And we are speaking to their brains where they are and teaching them advanced ideas that they'll use much later in their lives. And we can teach some very advanced concepts. Our system includes conditional statements like if statements or do until statements with variables. And I'm telling you, there are kids that'll take these variables and put them into their equations, and they'll write programs that say things like, if I'm near a wall, go backwards.
I love it. If statements at 3 years old. There you go. Why not? It's the 21st century after all. So, it strikes me, though, that when you say Kinderlab Robotics, what you're talking about is certainly not limited to robotics. It's really something else. So tell us how you see this as a science or an educational science, and how it has evolved for you, because you have been involved in robotics, per se, the actual robotics for a long time. So tell us about your evolution to this.
Well, you're absolutely right. The first robotics firm I worked for was called Automatics. It no longer exists. It was a company in the Boston area in the early 80s, and it was an industrial robotics company that was well known for unique robot vision and using robot vision in industrial manufacturing processes. Since then, I've worked in a wide variety of technologies, but 3 or 4 times for industrial robotics companies. And you are absolutely right that what I described to you regarding the wooden blocks, we use with robots because kids love the romance of a robot. They love the sense that they can control another object. When you're 4 years old, the things in your universe that you're in control of, very limited.
It's all about control, though, achieving control. It's like when you're 2 years old, it's a terrible twos, you try to beat up on everybody, but at 4, you're into control.
Well, you're trying to figure out what does it mean to control something, anything in your universe.
Yeah.
So, for example, one could take a set of wooden blocks and customize it for teaching another subject. For example, you could use it to teach piano, or you could use it to teach cooking. There are a wide variety of things that you could use it for, and I'll tell you that one of the things that makes this so popular among teachers in schools around the world, and we've sold our product, the Kinderlab robotic product is called Kibo. We have a Kibo robot kit that we've sold in 40 countries over the past 3 years.
How do you spell that, Mitch?
Kibo is K, as in Kentucky, I, B, as in boy, O.
Great word. It's a great word.
Yeah, it's a fun sounding word, right?
Yeah.
And what's really interesting to me is how often the Kibo robot kits are used to teach STEM in the context of some other curriculum subject. I'll give you an example. We had one teacher that had a curriculum called Dances from Around the World, a wonderful curriculum for kindergartners in her school. And each team of kids would get a 2 or 3 minute video clip of a dancer in some local dress dancing one of their traditional dances. In order to introduce STEM concepts, science, technology, engineering, and math concepts, she didn't have to change her curriculum. She added a Kibo to each group of kids and told them 2 things. She said, decorate this robot to look like that dancer. And secondly, program this robot to do the dance you saw in the video. Now, what's beautiful about that is this is a way of, for some kids, this is like eating their vegetables, right? For some like me, I would do this all the time. But for some kids, this is like eating their vegetables, and you hide the vegetables into something else that they really like art or cultural studies. And what the kids take away, first of all, is every kid gets a sense that they can write a program and that it has some meaning in the world. It's not just an academic thing to do. But the second thing is, they get a sense that science, technology, engineering, and math are not separate from all the other subjects in the world, all the other problems and challenges in the world. That in fact, it's an integrated problem-solving tool to be added to other tools. And that is a critical message. I can tell you that from my technical career. We never had trouble finding people that would be able to write this particular kind of code or design that kind of robot arm.
Yeah.
We had a bigger challenge finding people who could do some of that and integrate that to other aspects of innovation.
Oh, I want to talk to you about that. Now, we spoke, you and I, before the show began, about St. Andrew's Priory, and they had a couple of teachers on yesterday. We had a very nice show with them. I really enjoyed that. They talked about STEAM also. They talked about the A in STEAM standing for art. So far, you and I have not explored exactly what art is in this magic recipe, but what is art? Is art the blocks? What is art? Where does that fit in your approach?
Well, when we use the word and when we use the acronym STEAM, and we do both, we mean it in the traditional sense. So we mean that our robots are decorated by adding pipe cleaners and tissue paper and clothespins and toothpicks and whatever you have around, toilet paper tubes, and making the robot look like something else. Now, many robots in the market today are molded to look like some cool thing. And that's wonderful and cute. The problem is that tomorrow it's going to look like the same cool thing. And by day 3, it looks a little less cool. But if you have a robot designed like ours, which is primarily an art platform, then today you're going to design that robot to look like a ballerina. But tomorrow you're going to design it may be a carousel. And day 3, it may be Winnie the Pooh. And let me tell you about Winnie the Pooh for a minute. All robots are mobile robots that have sensors on them. You build the robots, they have wheels, and use different sensors at different times. And then there's this art stage. What many teachers do is they integrate the robot with literacy, with reading. So a story like Winnie the Pooh is a story they'll read to the whole class, and then they'll put a giant piece of paper on the floor and they say, class, let's make a map of the 100-acre wood. And then each team should be a different character from Winnie the Pooh. And in this story, Winnie the Pooh goes from Pooh Corner to Piglet's house to Owl's house. How would you program your robot to do that? And what does the kid have to do? They have to say, boy, how many times do I have to tell it to go forward in order to get from Winnie the Pooh's house to Piglet's house? And once I'm at Piglet's house, do I turn right or left to get to Owl's house? And suddenly, again, you have a very beautiful way of solving problems that includes engineering and science and math, and yet it doesn't feel like it's a math class.
You know, Mitch, just this morning I submitted one of our movies to the local community cable channel, and it's about drones, because we do, a fair amount of coverage on drones, and the technology moves fast. And one of the really wonderful scenes is where this guy, who happens to be an airlines pilot, is establishing the route of the drone. It's all automated. So he says, well, we're going to go out this degree and that far. We're going to turn right, going to go out that degree and that far and turn back. I'm going to change altitude. He's making a flight plan for this robot, and he's doing it right there in the field before he lets before he lets the drone go. And your discussion reminds me so much of his discussion, because you know, just like the trip with the kid in Winnie the Pooh, he's making a trip for the drone. So I'm saying, you know, well, this kid would understand what that airline pilot drone guy was doing. And
Absolutely.
with the same idea, he could do it himself.
Absolutely, and it's not just that. You know, what if you have kids that like football? When you're drawing up plays in football, how different is that? Not very different. This character goes here, this character, after you've gone here, look there, and then go the other way. It's a kind of thinking that's quite general and powerful in nature. And the more we can exercise those mental muscles of children and let them understand that they can apply them to things they already know, like football, or things they don't know, like mobile robotics engineering, the more they're going to feel empowered to do what they really want to do in their world.
I just came from a lunch where we were talking about leadership. And we have a number of speakers on the panel. I'm moderating this panel. It's for the Bar Association. And one of the most interesting things was, you know, what strategies do you employ to be a leader in the community? I mean, and of course, the definition of leader in the community is open for discussion too. But you know, taking this whole idea that you're talking about one step further. So I have my blocks. My blocks give me strategies. I need to strategize how I'm going to be a leader in the community, in business, in academia, in government, whatever it is, so I can actually plan my moves using these blocks, just like a flight path, just like Winnie the Pooh. It's the same. I can program not only, you know, 30 lines of code, I can program huge structures, structures that are leveraged, that will change the world. It's all the same thing, isn't it?
I completely agree. In fact, I can tell you that my personal career path was launched by a discovery in myself early in my career. It turns out I was an okay engineer, but I was a really good engineering manager, and I didn't know it until I was handed a project that was late, and it had a lot of moving parts and interactions between our small design team and a manufacturing team, a sales team, a finance group, and figuring out how to make the right series of events happen in the right sequence was something that engineers much smarter than I had not figured out, but I was able to figure it out. And it really launched me on a career from being a design engineer to being an engineering manager and leader. Now, as you point out, there's many, many different kinds of leadership. We can see these kinds of leadership emerging in kindergarten classrooms, working with these Kibo kids. And in fact, we encourage it. And there's two ways we encourage it. One is we encourage kids to work in groups of 2 to 4 kids at a time on any given problem. And we encourage them by giving them essentially the equivalent of merit badges. So somebody is the art master, and somebody is the hardware expert, and somebody is the coding expert. And they divide the problem up. Let's say it's the Dances from Around the World problem. And say, okay, who really knows the most about making this dancer look like the dancer in the video? Who's really good at disassembling the movements this person's making and replicating them with a series of block commands? And so the idea of dividing up problems for teams to work on them more effectively than any one person could is absolutely part of our curriculum. The second thing that's intrinsic in, believe it or not, those very simple wooden blocks is that they are 3-dimensional. And they have the same command on all 4 sides. So when you have 4 kids at a table working on a problem, all of them see the line of the code at the same time. Whereas if you're working on a screen, typing your program, generally only 1, maybe 2 people can easily see it. We really believe in round-tabling problems so they can be solved by teams. Because that's one of the meta skills that's critically important no matter what field you're going to work in or play in as you get older.
Yeah, and if you have them in blocks, we're showing the pictures you sent us now of some of your designs. But if you can see them that way, you know, I've coded in my life. I'm sure not to the extent you have, but I can recall forgetting where I am, looking at the code and not remembering exactly where I was and what that line of code is doing. That's why they always talk about how you got to comment your code, so you remember what it says, what it does, and if you don't comment it, you'll forget. Well, if you're using blocks, it's a graphical representation that will remind you all the time of what it's doing, what it's supposed to do. Yeah.
The legendary self-commenting code, wooden blocks with pictures on them.
It's what it is. You heard it here on Think Tech. So, one thing that strikes me, though, is that you're really teaching social skills here. One is, you get the one kid who he's good at, say, one aspect of this project. And so he's going to find that he's competent in that. And maybe that's going to shape, his level of confidence going forward, maybe even for his whole life. You build confidence in one kind of specialty, and maybe you really found something. Like I suggest, Mitch, that if you had the benefit of this kind of 2 to 4 modular group when you were a kid, you would have learned that you were not an engineer so much as an engineering manager much earlier.
Well, you may be right about that. It's funny, because of the socialization I got in my engineering education, being a manager was actually considered kind of a negative thing. It was kind of considered the uncreative part, the necessary evil part of getting things done.
Necessary evil, yeah.
It's funny how different cultural groups have different attitudes. And by the way, there are plenty of cultural groups who have literally the opposite attitude.
Yeah.
All the creativity is in the management and not any in the actual craft. And I would say they're both wrong, but that's my personal.
Well, I think, but you can be creative in whatever you do,
I think that's really important. And what's great about watching these kids when they're solving what we're describing as multi-dimensional problems is the kid who said, "Oh, I'm the artist. I'm doing the ballerina's costume." They're sitting right next to the person writing the code, and invariably at that age, the kid looks over and says, "That's not that hard. I can do that." And likewise, the kid who's writing the code is looking over at the kid who's doing the art and saying, "That's accessible. I could do what they're doing." So the idea that we're encouraging folks with different native skills to work next to each other, with each other as a team, not only teaches them team playing, but they actually learn from each other. That it's not as mysterious as it looks like when you just look at the finished product.
Yeah, this is really important, and it's the way education is going. It's, what do we call it? It's group collaboration. God knows how important that is for adults too. Maybe adults should have this product too. You have to develop this product for adults as well. This is not limited to kids.
Well, I've got to tell you something. This is absolutely true. About 4 weeks ago, we got our first order from a retirement community. I thought it was a mistake, and I was assured it's not a mistake. I was assured it's not it's an assisted living facility in upstate New York. And what they're saying is, folks want to learn new things, and this is a way of introducing concepts that every bit as sophisticated as computer science, but in a way that's fun and light and social. And why not?
Great. So great that I want to take another break. That's Mitch Rosenberg, Kinderlab Robotics. He joins us by Skype from Boston, Massachusetts. This is Likeable Science. Our regular host, Ethan Allen, is on vacation or traveled, and we're going to take a 1-minute break to think about all that he said so far. We're going to come back. We're going to look at where this goes in the future and how we get there. That's the important thing. We'll be right back.
You're watching Think Tech Hawaii, 25 talk shows by 25 dedicated hosts every week, helping us to explore and understand the issues and events in and affecting our state. Great content for Hawaii from Think Tech.
Hello, I'm Stephen Katz, and I'm the host of Shrink Wrap, which comes to you live every Tuesday at 3 p.m. on thinktechhawaii.com, and then it's repeated again whenever you want if you go to the website. On our show, we will be talking to all different kinds of therapists, psychologists, psychoanalysts, psychiatrists, people who talk about the mind, the brain, and about different ways to find happiness. I myself am a marriage and family therapist in practice here in Hawaii, and I hope you will join us because I've got a lot to learn, you've got a lot to learn, and it's a great ride. Thanks a lot. See you soon.
Bingo, we're back. I told you we were going to come back, and we came back. Mitch Rosenberg from Boston, Massachusetts, CEO of Kinderlab Robotics, joins us by Skype here on Likeable Science on Friday afternoon. We're really interested in this discussion, and I wanted to ask you, Mitch, you know, you're talking about science, but you're dealing with kids, and I suppose we're all kids of all ages, but we're still involved in education, and I mean, you know, a good part of what you're talking about is education. So somewhere along the line in your science career, you decided or you linked up with someone who is skilled in education. What's the story?
Well, it's a great question. Well, the background for that question is that I had just left a company that I had worked at as an executive, had been sold to Amazon, and I had made a little bit of money, and I was thinking, what can I do now that I have less pressure to bring in every possible penny I can? What can I do that would be something I do earn a living, but it might pay less and might be a better contribution? I thought, I'm going to become a middle school science teacher. And I was researching what it would take to get the right degrees to do that. And as it turns out, I have an elementary school kid myself, and I was at a birthday party of kids in that class, and one of the other parents pulled me aside, who I didn't know very well, pulled me aside and said, "You're Mitch Rosenberg, right?" And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "I hear you're a pretty good engineer and business guy." And I said, "Well, that's nice to hear." She said, "I have an idea that could be a great business." I said, "Sure, I'm happy to help you with your idea." This woman is...
And at that moment, you would have helped her, you know, without a business arrangement, you would have helped her, period, right?
Well, it's funny you say that. I said, absolutely. I said, I would be happy to help you evenings and weekends because I love small businesses. And if you have an idea, I'm happy to be like a consultant. And so we walked around the block about 40 times and talked about her idea. So Professor Marina Bears, is a professor of early childhood psychology and development at
There
Tufts.
she is. I see her now. She's on the screen.
At Tufts University. She has been researching since her PhD thesis at the MIT Media Lab. She's been researching how kids learn STEM concepts. And in recent years, for 8 or 10 years, she had been creating these prototype robots, bringing them into schools and observing how kids learn from them, but also how the teachers taught with them, and refining her ideas. And at one point she said, you know, for the past year and a half, every time I go to a school, the third question I get asked is, where can I buy these? They're awesome, and I can't produce them in quantity, and I have no idea how to run a business. Would you run this as a business with me? And at the time I said, no, I have my own plan. I'm happy to give you consulting help for free. It's a great idea. It's a really valuable mission. But what happened was, after a couple of years of trying it that way, she found that it really wasn't working. And she came back to me and said, wouldn't you be willing to be my business partner? I have some ideas about how we can get some National Science Foundation grants. I said, okay, and that's how I signed up. So the whole idea, all these ideas that I talked to you about concerning tangible computing languages based on wooden blocks, and using a robot to essentially give instant feedback to kids about what their ideas were like, these all came from Professor Bears, who is a world expert in early childhood development. She has 3 books on the subject, and she has, by the way, a wonderful TED Talk on the various ways kids learn and how to create an environment more conducive to both creativity and STEM learning.
That's great. That's great. So we can see that on TED Talks. We can see her. Maria Bears, B-E-R-S, yes?
Actually, her name is Marina with
Marina.
an N.
Say it one more time.
Marina Bears, M-A-R-I-N-A. If you Googled Marina Bears TED, you would get her TED Talk, which is very compelling and a lot of fun.
Okay, great. So, you know, I'm just wondering, you know, somewhere in this, in those apparent toys, it's writing code. I mean, you have some kind of processor in there. So let's talk technical for a minute and tell me how that works. You're at that end of it for sure.
Well, yes, there's a small and inexpensive processor in our robot. It's a PIC processor. It doesn't have to be very sophisticated, because the complexity of programs, even if we have nested if statements and nested do-until statements is not very complex. So it's a very, very simple circuit. One thing I can tell you about the circuit, though, that is unique, if you look at most robot kits, if you look at most devices in the world today, the appearance of the electronics is always hidden by something cool and slick and plastic and metal that's brushed aluminum.
Yeah.
Ours is transparent because it's really important that kids learn that technology isn't the same as magic. It has a certain appearance, it's constructed by humans, it has parts, you can learn what those parts do. That's not part of our curriculum for 4-year-olds. But just the visual cue that it's not magic, that somebody somewhere constructed this as a device to solve problems, is a really important message for kids in a world where when they look at technology today, if they look at their parents' cell phones or iPads, they basically get the message that technology is a closed universe that can't be understood. Our products send the exact opposite message.
Yeah.
You can see the processor, you can see the batteries, you can see wires, you can see the interconnected contacts. We show the gear train of the motors, we show the motors.
But you do have patents too, don't you?
We do indeed. So this work was done for many years while Marina was researching this at Tufts University. Tufts holds and defends these patents. We have an exclusive license in the area of education and toys to use these patents.
Well, now it's time to talk about where this is going to go, Mitch. For one thing, after the world gets their hands on this video, the phone is going to ring off the hook for you. They're going to come in by the hundreds of thousands from everywhere. But aside from that, where do you see it going? Where do you see the company going? I think you might change your name from robotics to something else. What's your market now? What does it look like in the future? And how will you, deliver this really wonderful mission to education worldwide?
Well, it's a great question. Let's talk about some of the things that are working well right now. So even as a very small company, and we are quite small, just outside of Boston, Massachusetts, nevertheless, we've sold this product into 40 countries around the world from our own web store. So what's really interesting and amazing about the world today and the technology today that supports this world is that it makes it possible, without amassing a huge fortune in manufacturing equipment, without hiring thousands and thousands of people, you can influence the world with a small company, and that influence can go all over.
It's great to be alive, isn't it?
It's a really good time to actually be innovating in the area of business.
Yeah.
So right now we are already realizing our dream of beginning to take steps towards our goal, which is universal STEM literacy. Now, there are a lot more things we can do, and we're going to be developing new skills and curriculum elements for the Kibo system. So it'll be possible to have much richer curricula. Those curricula, as I've described, will include both technological ideas as well as non-technological ideas. We're going to invest very heavily in teacher training. We're going to make teacher training products, if you will, via video, and also an army of teacher trainers, so that STEM education will be possible by teachers who don't necessarily have a STEM background themselves. Mm-hmm. So one of the real challenges, if you're a teacher and the world is changing around you, is how do you teach something that you personally don't really necessarily have a deep background in? So that's an area we're going to invest in a lot. And Marina's already traveling around the world extensively, giving lectures about how to make STEM accessible to the kids, and just as important, possible and accessible to the teachers themselves.
I take it that, your products, your idea is not language dependent. In other words, you could go anywhere in the world, any language, and it would still work, it would still be interesting, it would still help kids with education. Am I right about that?
You are absolutely right about that, and that is a very insightful observation. Not only that, we can imagine helping kids learn language using this technique. For example, our blocks have a picture that, once it's explained or observed pretty cursorily, can be understood by most kids, but it also has a word or two about what that block is doing. If that word or two was in a secondary language, not a primary language, you'd start learning that language. So both of the ideas are true. First, that it's language independent, but also that it can be helpful in helping kids learn language. And there are some other things it can be helpful for too. Some children have trouble visually sequencing things. They have trouble reading, for example, because they mix up the sequence of letters and words. We're working on a module that will make it possible for our Kibo robot to say out loud what it's going to do based on the code that the child wrote. So if the child wrote a 5-line code, the robot would first say, first I'm going to go forward, then I'm going to turn on the light, then I'm going, and you see what we're doing. For kids who have trouble visually, we're giving them the cues audially, and that'll help them circumnavigate around the challenges that their particular brains are wired with in order to overcome them. Moreover, I can tell you that Marina's team from Tufts is assisting in some research going on in Panama right now with autistic children. Now, what they're finding, and I don't have the brain science to represent this, but what it sounds like when they describe what they're finding is that kids who have trouble, even at an older age, learning abstract concepts of any kind, when they encounter Kibo, where everything is in fact tangible and kinetic and visual, they are absolutely able to learn concepts that they wouldn't have been able to learn any other way because it's using different pathways in their brains.
Yeah.
The pathways in their brains that process things that are tangible are different from the ones that aren't working in the traditional way that process abstraction.
This is the merger of education and engineering, the merger of psychology and, everything. Why do I feel, by the way, in closing, I'd just like to see what you think when I say this. Why do I feel that there's an Echo and an Alexa in your future? It's sort of, it's sort of an integration of your whole life, if you will. Why do I feel that's a possibility for you?
Well, I'm not exactly sure, but you could be entirely correct, or something really surprising could happen. It always does. When I was going to college, and I thought I knew a fair amount about electrical engineering, I knew nothing about the internet because it was used by very few folks. And suddenly, from left field, something comes to change your world, and you got to adapt to it. So it may go in a predictable way, or it may not. But I'm confident that no matter how it goes, I'll personally be able to adapt, we'll be able to adapt our products, and our customers, our kids, are going to be able to learn how to adapt.
I'm confident that you will too, Mitch. That's Mitch Rosenberg, CEO of Kinderlab Robotics, Boston, Massachusetts, part of Likeable Science here, Ethan Allen's program. We have really enjoyed the discussion. Thank you so much, Mitch.
Oh, I really enjoyed it myself. Thank you, Jay.
Aloha.
Aloha. Bye.